The Sierra Nevada rose like jagged tombstones above the wearied travelers. By late October of 1846, snow fell in relentless sheets, burying the trail, the wagons, and the fragile hopes of the Donner Party. What had once been a caravan of ambition and promise now lay scattered across the wilderness, huddled in crude shelters of logs and canvas. The howling wind their constant tormentor. The storm had sealed their fate. They were trapped. The first days of entrapment brought disbelief. Surely, they told themselves, the snow would pass quickly. Surely the path westward would open again, and with it the promise of California's golden valleys. But the sky was merciless, and each dawn revealed the same vision, white upon white, unbroken, swallowing the landscape in silence and despair. Their cattle, once the backbone of their journey, began to weaken. Without grass to graze, the beasts starved, their ribs showing through stretched skin. The settlers tried to butcher them, salvaging meat before the animals collapsed entirely. But the snow buried the carcasses, and the meat froze into slabs harder than stone. Soon, the people themselves began to fade. Bread dwindled. Flour became dust at the bottom of sacks. Every crumb, every bone boiled to jelly, every strip of hide scraped from wagon covers was consumed. Hunger gnawed at them constantly, turning night into a series of hollow groans and the days into an endless march of weakness. Inside the cabins at Truckee Lake, children whimpered for food. Mothers shushed them with lullabies, though their own lips cracked with thirst and cold. Fathers stared at the fire, unblinking, as though hypnotized by its meager warmth. The families tried to cling to routine. They prayed. They told stories. They whispered of spring. But their eyes betrayed the truth. They were watching one another not just as neighbors, but as potential sustenance. It is one thing to imagine hunger. It is another to live with it, hour after hour. When the body turns inward and begins devouring itself, by December, starvation was no longer a looming threat, but a brutal reality. Some perished quietly, their last breath a sigh carried away by the wind. Others lingered, delirious, speaking of feasts and warmth as their bodies withered. Death became familiar. It no longer shocked. It was an expected visitor, stepping silently from one shelter to the next. And with death came a decision that no human soul should face. The idea first crept in as whispers. What if the dead could serve the living? At first, the thought was unthinkable. Cannibalism was not just taboo, it was a sin, an abomination, a curse upon the soul. Yet starvation has a voice louder than morality. As the nights lengthened and the children's cries weakened, the settlers found themselves circling closer to the unspeakable. They told themselves it would be only those already gone. Never murder. Never betray a lonely necessity. The bodies were there, frozen, preserved by the cold. Flesh turned to ice, but still flesh. Hunger made the choice. It began hesitantly, a strip of muscle cut from a lifeless thigh, fingers trembling as they placed it into boiling water. The broth smelled of iron and decay, yet to those who tasted, it was salvation. Once the line was crossed, there was no turning back. The cabins filled with silence as families partook of human flesh. They spoke little of it, but the act hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. The children, too young to understand, ate without knowing. The adults ate knowing too much. Yet even in this bleakness, divisions sharpened. Some refused the flesh, clinging to faith and dignity though their bodies failed. Others embraced it fully, their eyes hollow, their hands steady as they carved and boiled. Trust frayed. Suspicion grew. Who would die next? Who would be chosen? The wilderness had stripped them bare. They were no longer pioneers, no longer neighbors. They were animals in the snow, fighting against extinction. Outside, the storm raged on. The Sierra Nevada was a white prison, the snowdrifts higher than wagons, the sky a ceaseless gray. Time lost meaning. Days blurred into nights. Hunger erased memory, leaving only the need to endure the next hour. But endurance had a price. One by one, madness crept in. Hallucinations seized the starving. They spoke to phantoms, saw banquets in the snow, reached out to touch loved ones already buried beneath drifts. Some walked into the storm, never to return. Their footprints swallowed instantly. Others clutched knives, suspicious of their own kin, afraid that survival might demand a darker price still. Then came the forlorn hope. In desperation, a small group resolved to break free. 15 souls, gaunt and trembling, fashioned crude snowshoes and set out across the frozen wilderness. They carried scraps of food, meager rations, and the faint hope of rescue. But the mountains were merciless. The snow swallowed their strength. Each step a battle. Frostbite blackened their fingers. Their eyes glazed with exhaustion. Hunger tightened its grip until it drove them to the same horror faced in the cabins. The bodies of the fallen became the only path forward. The forlorn hope ate the dead. They told themselves it was for survival, for the chance to bring relief back to the others. But each bite left a scar upon their souls, one that would never heal. Back at the lake, the rest of the party languished. The dead multiplied. The living diminished. Children lay beside the corpses of parents. Too weak to weep, friends turned away from one another, unable to bear the sight of faces that might soon become food. The smell of death mingled with smoke from the fires, a stench that clung to their skin, their clothes, their memories, and yet, amidst the horror, a spark endured. Some refused to surrender to madness. Some shielded the children, giving them morsels of food while going hungry themselves. Some clung to prayer, whispering words into the icy night, words that defied despair. These small acts of humanity stood against the darkness, fragile but unbroken. But the Sierra Nevada would not release them yet. Weeks turned to months. Rescue was still far away, and the snow showed no mercy. The Donner Party had entered the mountains as pioneers. Now they were prisoners. Prisoners of hunger, prisoners of the storm, prisoners of their own desperate choices. What remained was not simply survival. It was entrance through damnation, to be continued in Episode 3, Salvation and the Scars of Memory.